Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. All right. Check-ins. Maybe like 3% nervous. There's a giddiness, and I'm really looking forward, whatever word could describe, looking forward to this conversation that we're about to have right now with my friend Greg. So we have Greg Thomas here today at the Stoa. And Greg has over 25 years of experience as a writer, producer, broadcaster, and educator. He's CEO and lead facilitator of the Jazz Leadership Project. And he has written extensively about culture, race, and jazz in publications ranging from The Village Voice, New Republic, Salon, Guardian Observer. And he's lectured on American cultural history at Harvard, Columbia, Hamilton College, and jazz at Lincoln Center. And he's into integral theory. He's plugged into that scene, and he was recently featured on Rebel Wisdom a few times. And that's how we got on each other's radar. The folks at Rebel Wisdom introduced us. And then when me and Greg zoomed in, we just like kindred spirit. We were jamming and riffing, and like, man, let's set up a session. And we had like 20 sessions that we had lined up already, and just on the first encounter, and we settled on a session called Stoic Jazz. Because I come from the tradition of Stoicism, and he comes from the tradition of blues and jazz, and there's a lot of intersection between the thinking there. So that being said, how it's going to work today, Greg and I are going to jam a little bit for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to open up for Q&As. So if you have any questions during our kind of conversation, feel free to write in the chat box. And if you've been here, you know the drill. I will call on you, and you unmute yourself, ask your question. If you want me to read your question on your behalf, just indicate that in the chat box. That being said, Greg, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, Peter. How are you, man?
I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you for inviting me to the store.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So there's like so many threads I want to go down, but maybe why did we settle on Stoic Jazz from your perspective?
Because I feel that there's an intersection between certain wisdom traditions. In fact, if you really want to go to the deepest part of wisdom traditions, I think there's connectivity on many, if not all of them. But in particular with Stoicism, I've found in my studies of it, that it's not about what became a very abstract kind of philosophy in the West. It was more about like, how do you live a good life? How do you flourish in life no matter what is going on outside of yourself? What do you have that you have some control over? Excuse me. Much of our lives on the outside, we don't have control over. But what do we have control over? Well, our responses to situations. We have control over whether we get up in the morning, we have early, we have control over what we focus on. We have control over whether or not we're going to review the day. We have control over our arete. What is our vision and values of excellence? What is our vision of a good life and a good soul, eudaimonia? These kind of principles I find are, because they're wisdom tradition, they're not bound to a particular time. So I guess one of the guests you had on, I was actually there, James Carse, one of my favorites. So, when you're talking about wisdom, you're talking about an infinite game. This is not something that's bound to a particular time. It's applicable to our lives now. So the same thing is true for the blues idiom, for the wisdom that has come from the Black American experience here in the United States, and found its way into the blues as a form of poetry, as a form of song, and as a philosophy, a wisdom tradition of life itself, particularly through the work and thought of Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible Man, and Albert Murray, author of 13 books on blues and jazz primarily, mostly nonfiction, but 4 novels, a tetralogy. And I find there's a lot of synergy between those two, though there are some distinctions, but I've just wondered about it. And so I really welcome the opportunity to explore the possibilities with you, man.
So yeah, you turned me on to this guy, Albert Murray. And I'm like, I thank you for doing that, because I've been reading all the articles you sent me and I've been reading about him, and this guy is amazing. And there's a bunch of things I want to inquire about, but there's this term he has that really stuck out to me, elegant resilience. And then here's a quote from him. A definite characteristic of the descendants of American slaves is the orientation to elegance, the disposition in the face of all the misery and uncertainty in the universe to refine all of human action in the direction of the dance beat elegance. I submit that there is nothing that anyone in the world has ever done that is more civilized or sophisticated than to dance elegantly, which is to state with your total physical being an affirmative attitude toward the sheer fact of existence. I'm like, man, that's where it's at.
I think Peter agrees with you. I think Peter agrees with you, man.
Yeah. Shook his hand.
That is cool. Yeah, that's my man. That's Master Murray. Well, elegant resilience. I mean, to him, it was about art and elegance versus entropy, okay, and chaos. So for him, elegance, I'll give you a quick example. There's an African-American scholar who's a favorite of Ken Burns. Oh, what's his name? Gerald Early, who I had occasion to meet and talk to. I was a member of the Columbia University Jazz Study Group in the late 90s through the early 2000s, until that study group became the Center for Jazz Studies at Columbia. So I remember reading one time where, in the New Republic, I think it was, Gerald Early critiqued Murray on his concept of elegance, because he defined it, early that is, as kind of an effete kind of thing to him, right? I brought that up to Murray. He says, man, these guys need to get an education. He says, when I'm talking about elegance, I'm talking about like mathematical elegance. Like you come up with a proof that is so elegant for something that's complicated or complex, but you come up with a solution that's simple, but that incorporates all of that complexity and solves the problem in an elegant way. So for Murray, the blues and jazz were ways, and there are other aspects of African-American culture that we could talk about, from the dance traditions to the spirituals and gospel, that also reflect this. But if you're talking about music, blues and jazz, it was a way that we responded to the vicissitudes of life, to the absurdity of life, to the unfairness of life, to the actual segregation and oppression, all of that stuff. We responded in a way in which we created forms that allowed us to put our wisdom into those forms, to confront life in a way that allowed us to have what Kenneth Burke calls a frame of acceptance. In literary terms, there are, according to Kenneth Burke, 2 primary frames. You have a frame of rejection and a frame of acceptance. So a frame of rejection is like a lament, an elegy. Life is wrong and it shouldn't be that way. And you create different narrative forms through that. The frame of acceptance accepts the fact that life is a low down, dirty shame, and says, you know something? We're going to persevere. We're going to struggle. We're going to rise to the occasion anyway. So that's a frame of accepting the necessity for struggle. And to Murray, that's the foundation of like epic heroism. So for Murray, the blues and jazz were forms that reflected American principles of democracy in action, and reflected an orientation to life that says that no matter what, we're going to still, for as many bars as we've got, swing as much as we can. Elegantly, so we're solving problems through our movement, through our style, through our improvisation. And there's that resilience there, so it gives us a way to bounce back from the troubles of our lives, okay? And he didn't use this term because I don't think Nassim Taleb had created that yet, but anti-fragile. See, so I think he would probably, I mean, I think elegant resilience is actually more elegant than elegant anti-fragility as a sound, as a poetic sound, but that's kind of what he means, you know? I hope I answered your question. I kind of went around to get to it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And this is where the intersection of Stoicism and like the blues, jazz, idiom just totally collide. Is this kind of what we were talking about before? Like the obstacle is the way, right? With this frame of acceptance, rather than having this victim mindset where you're just not kind of acknowledging and embracing the hardship of life. And I just like this elegant resilience, just that kind of tag of elegance there. That's something I think modern Stoicism is missing, or at least a lot of people who talk about modern Stoicism, because there's like beauty to be found in the resilience and the struggle, and putting emphasis on that, I think, is the right move. And then there's another quote like this that's coming to mind right now, just like geeking out about, by Ralph Ellison. The blues is an impulse to keep the painful details and episodes of a brutal experience alive in one's aching consciousness. Like, love it.
Keep going, man, because that whole quote is a classic quote. Can you keep going on that?
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll start again. The blues is an impulse to keep the painful details and episodes of a brutal experience alive in one's aching consciousness, to finger its jagged grain and to transcend it, not by the constellation of philosophy, but by squeezing from it a near tragic, near comic lyricism.
That's classic Ellison there. Yeah. Yeah. From Richard Wright's Blues, 1947.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that says it, man. Now, let me give you another aspect. Murray and Ellison both like the term antagonistic cooperation. This is a term that derives from the hero's journey, from the archetype. And it basically says that the hero has to face challenges. And each of us, in our own way, as we journey through life, we're on a journey, and you can say that journey is a heroic journey. As we face those challenges, are we going to face it with a frame of acceptance, or are we going to face it with a frame of rejection? If you face it with the frame of acceptance, that leaves room and space for you to laugh at your troubles, to cry at your troubles, to get ready to battle, to fight. But it's a perspective, and here's the wisdom. It's a perspective that looks at antagonism and challenges as a way that cooperates with you so that you can grow and learn in situations. So you could tell that the words antagonist and cooperation, they don't seem to go together, and there's a tension there. But we know about evolution. That's going to happen through tension. And when you talk about music, you have tension and then release. So all of these like ideas and concepts go together. So antagonistic cooperation was a very important idea for them that I think goes to the obstacle is the way.
And like, I wanted to inquire into, rooted cosmopolitanism and like the other interests that you had, but how do you teach this stuff in your kind of like jazz leadership? Is this something that you sort of put emphasis on?
That's interesting. We have in Jazz Leadership Project, we do workshops with a live band for organizations, but small groups of teams and organizations to help them become more resilient and high performing. So we have 4 principles and 6 practices, right? So antagonistic cooperation is one of the foundational principles that we use, okay? So it's embedded in the very structure of what we do. And we demonstrate it, like for example, for antagonistic cooperation, we usually show a video of Wynton Marsalis and John Faddis, 2 of the greatest jazz trumpeters alive, going head to head on an incredibly fast song by Dizzy Gillespie. And I mean, it's like on the metronome, it's like, I don't know, 300 beats per minute. I mean, it's ridiculous. And they are trading fours and they are battling, but they're doing it in a respectful way. They're listening, they're responding, and they're doing it to take each other to higher and higher heights. So it can be viewed from the outside as antagonistic, but they're cooperating with each other to grow and to bring pleasure to themselves and to the audience and the other band members. So we give those kind of examples, and then we, for antagonistic cooperation, we'll look at challenges that people have gone through in their life or at work. And then we help them do a shift from like a victim perspective, oh, so-and-so from the outside, it's their fault and blah, 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 to more of a player, you know? You're a player in this game, this infinite game. We don't get that deep into the philosophy, but we're applying the philosophy. And we do a shift from how do you look at your challenges as something that's against you as something that's actually for you to grow and learn, and use actual examples in their lives to reflect that principle. They write about it, they talk about it in dialogue, and that's how we kind of embody and enact it in that sense. So that's one example. I'm going to be doing some more classes on cultural intelligence and that type of thing in the fall that'll have a lot of these principles also.
What is the distinction, like, but for people who don't know, like between blues and jazz?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Okay, so blues is the fundamental form that actually is the foundation for American music writ large. Blues is a form that in the American South on the Mississippi River developed. First, you have the folk blues, where the image of the guitar player who's playing the guitar and singing the blues, like a 12-bar blues, or playing harmonica and then singing the blues. So you have the individual there. When you get, and that's like turn of the century, right? W.C. Handy was a great writer of songs like St. Louis Blues, Memphis Blues. He codified the blues and wrote many songs to really write down the tradition, what in many cases it wasn't really written down. And these were itinerant musicians. So just like the old song and dance men and women, and back in the day in Europe, this is a similar thing. So they would travel on the railroad and go from place to place and play and get a little money. And but W.C. Handy is important in that. Then you have in the 20s a period that's called the classic blues. This is where women like Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and Mamie Smith and others, they sang with a band, and they were big sellers in what they call race records at the time, big sellers of the blues. So that was a transition from the individual to more of a group dynamic. And the distinction between blues was usually a 12-bar form with 1, 4, and 5 of the 8 notes, or the 8 do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale being prominent in those. With jazz, you, and I'll use a Murray term, you extend, elaborate, and refine upon that folk foundation. And then you create forms that go into more of a popular, which is more of a wider span of embrace, to fine art, where if you listen to Leadbelly, Muddy, what's his name, Muddy Waters, or any number of really, even B.B. King, great blues artists. You listen to Charlie Parker play the blues, You listen to Duke Ellington compose what Murray called the fully orchestrated blues statement, and you can tell that there is a level of sophistication and technical prowess that is beyond what you usually find at the folk level. So you got a foundation of the blues that then jazz builds upon. And actually gospel music, which was the father of gospel music is Thomas Dorsey. He actually was a blues pianist playing with Ma Rainey. And then he transitioned to the sacred dimension and started writing gospel music, which was actually based on the blues form. I hope that answers the question adequately.
Yeah. In this article you sent, there's like the three distinctions between like folk art, pop fare, and then fine art. And like, could you tease out a little bit more, like, you know, pop fare versus fine art? Like, what makes it, like, what are the heuristics that make it what it is?
Okay, good question. I really appreciate it. I like the way you framed that too. Well, I gave you the folk, you know, that's like the earth. But then for pop music, what pop music, and look, pop music has taken over the world these days, okay? So pop music actually draws upon folk, fine, whatever, and it presents the music in a way that is most widely appealing, okay? Through how it does what it does, rhythmically, melodically. Of course, we know in terms of corporations, there's huge marketing dollars that go into making certain stars. But pop just means it has a very wide appeal. Fine art is the realm of masterpieces, of masters, grandmasters who create masterpieces that stand the test of time beyond the time that it was created, and does so in a way where they stomp the blues continually throughout time, because they're facing entropy and chaos itself and saying, you know something, we're going to bring some neg entropy to this with a masterpiece. I could let you hear certain solos that were 60, 70 years ago, but the power, the majesty, the combination of technical virtuosity with deep soulful feeling is so profound that it just becomes a masterpiece. So those are some of the distinctions, you know, and there are some pop art that becomes fine art, don't get me wrong. I listened to Whitney Houston singing the Star Spangled Banner. It gives me chills every time. It's incredible. That's fine art. Donny Hathaway singing For All We Know. Masterpiece. So it's not confined to jazz, and not all of jazz is fine art. Some jazz is just good music, but then you have the masters and grandmasters that create masterpieces, which you can then say is in that rare realm of the fine arts.
And when you were describing the fine art, it was almost like you're having an orgasm, right? You're just like so into it. So is there certain like out of those three categories, when it comes to like jazz or blues, like is there a certain ontological state that you get in order to appreciate it, or does it, like when you listen to it, you fall into it and you like equally appreciate the different categories and, like, you know, different moments of your life, or you're just, you know, more into the fine art when it comes to jazz?
Oh, that's another really good question. Good inquiry, man. The thing about fine art is that often these days, it takes some developmental work. By developmental work, I don't mean in terms of like spiral dynamics, like you've got to be at the postmodern level to grok this. I don't mean it in that sense. I mean that because there's certain levels of complexity and sophistication to the form, you just need to have an introduction. I mean, I sat down with someone recently and showed them the spiral dynamics, you know, from beige to yellow and turquoise. And I explained it and I showed it. And then we looked at we looked at Peter Mary's Volution theory. And because she had that foundation, she was able to get it. All you need is an introduction. So as far as jazz, sometimes you just need an introduction because jazz is not really heard and on radio stations, not much on TV, so people are not familiar. But if you can explain someone that, okay, you got the bass and the drums, and they hold the swing, and the bass is walking, and the drums is riding the cymbal, and the piano is comping, which means complementing or accompanying, and the lead instrument, the trumpet or sax, is usually out front, and you may be showing in a 4-chart graph that we actually do in the Jazz Leadership Project. People can get it, and then when they listen, it's like, oh. And the thing is, but even without that, you could feel and sense when you're hearing something great. Even without that, if I played some Charlie Parker right now, you could feel that this is on another level of saxophone playing. This is not Kenny G. I don't mean to diss Kenny G. Kenny G's got a beautiful tone. He's a pop artist, okay? He's an instrumental R&B player. Don't get me wrong. But Charlie Parker is on another level. John Coltrane, that's another level, you know? So yes, you can feel it and sense it, but usually it takes some grounding and some training, or just, some introduction to basic concepts that you build upon.
Mm. And I'm going to throw an article that was written by Greg in the chat box. He has a bunch of videos there, and he has some commentary on. So I definitely recommend check that out. It's from your Integral Life article.
Oh, thank you.
So a couple more questions, but if you have any questions for Greg, now's the time to start throwing it in the chat box. And then I will call on you in a moment. So a couple other things I wanted to touch on. There was this term in one of the articles, and something that you quite liked, and I just mentioned it previously, is that rooted cosmopolitanism. And it's not by Albert Murray. He didn't say that. I don't think. There's two other philosophers. Could you speak a little bit more about that and how you resonate with that term so deeply?
Thank you so much, man. You give me an opportunity to riff on stuff that I don't get a chance to speak about enough, so I so appreciate it. Rooted cosmopolitanism is a term that comes from the philosopher Anthony Appiah, who's now at NYU teaching in the law school. He has a weekly column in the New York Times Magazine. He writes for various publications, Wall Street Journal, Times. Brilliant guy, brilliant. So usually you hear the idea of an unrooted cosmopolitan, someone who, is a citizen of the world, no moorings, no foundation, no roots. And frankly, in the history of the term, they were usually speaking about Jewish folks when they said that. So he coined this rooted cosmopolitanism as a way of looking at just the reality that you can be rooted in a tradition, in a place, in a tradition, ethnically, culturally, but you can still be cosmopolitan at the same time. You can still be world-centric and cosmocentric. You can still be both. And to me, it just makes so much sense. So if you put it in spiral dynamics terms, you could say first tier is kind of the rooted part, and you could say second tier is the cosmopolitan part. Now, of course, I'm, what would be the term? I'm privileging the cosmopolitan on the higher level, but I think it's a useful term to get away from some of the potholes and trap doors of race talk and race discourse. So we could talk about traditions, idioms, cultures that you can feel rooted and grounded in. And at the same time, you can relate on larger spheres of care and concern and identification. Danielle Allen, who's at Harvard, she's got 2 PhDs. I mean, it's like just the ridiculous level of education. She was at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Studies for years. And she also adopts the term rooted cosmopolitanism in certain contexts. So yeah, I think that's a term that I think people can use. I mean, I proposed it to the integral community through Integral Life. And for some reason, maybe I was the wrong messenger. People didn't seem to gravitate. At least maybe they did, and they didn't tell me. But it seems to me it just so well describes, like, it's an integral concept in that you can be rooted, but you could also be cosmopolitan at the same time. Because if you're supposed to transcend and include all of that, shouldn't you be rooted, but as well as cosmopolitan? I mean, to me, it just makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I dig it. Because, the Stoics have, they view themselves as citizens of the cosmos. But then that key thing that you mentioned that's often doesn't get mentioned often is that rooted piece, right? So it's like both end. You can have both. And I think that is more honest to the human experience, just gesturing towards one and not actually denying the lived experience that you have every day. Yeah, and I want to just hand it over to you if you have any questions for me, if you want to do something burning for you or inquiry. But I just wanted to also appreciate that it's rare now, I feel like, when someone comes in with all these different cool concepts and terms like, elegant resilience, or, the root of cosmopolitanism, or the blues idiom. And I just geek out over that. So, I appreciate for giving me this download of all this new material.
Sure, man. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you something. When did you get into Stoicism, and what did it trigger in your body? Not just your mind. What did it trigger in your body?
Right. I don't know if you hear dogs barking above, so it's an opportunity to practice all of our Stoicism. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. What did it trigger in my body? So I was a first year university student, and I was in philosophy, and there was no mention of Stoicism in philosophy. It was only until a friend gifted me Epictetus's handbook. That's when I discovered Stoicism, and it just immediately clicked. That was the exact book, actually, that I was gifted, and it just immediately clicked. I'm like, yes, this is it. Not only on an intuitive level, but on an intellectual level, and I guess it. I don't know if I felt largely disembodied. Like, I didn't have a lot of somatic practices when I was younger, but it did have a grounding effect. Like, it had a firmness there. Like, okay, it's harder to shake me now when I had these principles kind of downloaded.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. All right, appreciate that. Now, I'm looking in the chat, and I see a bunch of stuff here.
Yeah.
But I really want to respect your role as moderator, facilitator, curator, and have you pick the ones that you think we should be bringing out.
Yeah. So usually you can veto it as well. Usually
Okay.
I use my discernment and just kind of see what questions feel alive, and just piggyback on the ones that follow. So let me just take a look. Okay, here's a good one, and this is sort of related to what we were talking about. And they want me to read this on their behalf. So, hey, Greg, enjoyed your talk on integral life. What has been your strategy in navigating through the meta crisis? Any tips to help in mediation through the culture war? This is our bread and butter here.
Well, thank you for that question. And I just so resonated with Peter's term, memetic mediation. That spoke to me because I feel that is one of my roles to mediate this meta crisis we're in. I'm 56 years old. I have been engaged in deep study for a very long time. And I've been writing and publishing for a very long time. I've experienced a lot of life. I've got a daughter who's in her early 20s and married and lives in the Bay Area, So I've got some living under me, but I've got a lot of study too. So I almost feel like I'm kind of being prepared to enter the culture wars in a way that I can do some mediation between and among some of the factions, some of the different, groups of thinkers, of discoursance, if that's a word, because I don't find it happening. I find people that talking past each other, they're flaming each other. You know, I mean, now at the high levels of the culture, in terms of like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Let's talk about Black intellectuals for a second. There are certain Black intellectuals in the Wall Street Journal who can flame other Black intellectuals and writers and journalists and the New York Times and vice versa. But why won't they ever get together and talk? Why? What's up with that? Now, some are willing to do it, and that's great, but I don't see many or any people actually bringing them together to have a respectful conversation where they can agree to disagree, they can work through and wrestle through issues and go through some agon, you know? I just don't see it happening, and it's ridiculous. I mean, some of this has to do with the way social media is structured, and now mainstream media is structured so that the polarities and the dichotomies are something that triggers our amygdalas and our, you know, fear response, flight or fight, and all of that. And they're able to get viewership, clicks. That's why for decades I haven't watched local news in the evening. They always start with some type of tragic, horrific crime. And I knew what they were doing when I was like a teenager. I'm like, they're doing this shit on purpose to trigger you, you know? And I'm not gonna fall into that. So the structures are set up for that. And we have to find some ways, and it'll take some courage. And I'm sure I'm gonna get my knocks, but I'm ready for it. I think I've been prepared for it. So in terms of how I deal with it, I stay centered in myself. Through my own practices, I meditate. I have a wonderful wife, so I have a support system. I have good friends. I've got great books. This is my Ellison Murray library here. And so, but it's like, I almost feel that I can't hold in these perspectives and this knowledge and not bring it to the fore, that I have a responsibility to step up because the need is so great, you know? So I'm willing to take the risks, you know, to do some curation and facilitation and memetic mediation, you know, to do that.
Yeah. And I do definitely think you're the man for that job, especially when it comes to the race issues. And someone just said in the chat, the culture wars needs more of you, Greg.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, so Greg and I are having conversations about including him and involving him more in the memetic mediation project at the Stoa as well. So we'll see where that goes. So another question, this one's pretty good. Andrew, could you unmute yourself and ask Greg your question?
Oh, okay. Hi. I'm just curious, like, if you had to pick a song or two, like, that everybody should hear before they die, what would it be? Like, I know it's hard, but I just want to pick like, whatever's alive for you, like the first thought.
Wow. Oh man. There's a song called Better Days by Leandria Johnson. She's a gospel singer. And that song moves me so much because she's talking about, it's like a blues situation, you know? Sometimes the people closest to you are, you know, not supportive. You've got, you know, what is it? God bless the child who's got his own and all of that kind of stuff. But it's a song of hope saying that better days are coming, you know? So it's just, it moves me. So that's one song. Let's see. Oh my goodness.
And that's
Oh.
Angela James? That's
No, Leandria Johnson.
Leandria Johnson. Okay.
Yeah, Leandria.
Leandria Johnson.
Better Days. Um, how much time do we have, Peter?
So we usually schedule for an hour, but we can go
Okay.
over a little bit longer if.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though, I mean, see, don't get me started actually playing music. See, we'll be here for a long time. You know, so check that out. I mean, there are others. Lord knows there are others, but that's one that I would strongly recommend. And maybe I was called to say that for you.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the other Andrew had a question as well.
Oh, thank you, Greg. I'm a big fan of the blues. I listen to a lot of different kind of music, but there's something about the blues and sort of like the visceral connection that it brings to me that it really draws me towards it. Like I've been playing guitar for a while, and you mentioned B.B. King and like those bends that B.B. King does. Like it's not the most complicated stuff, but it just really brings out like a whole bunch of emotion, and it's really great. Yeah, so the question I had is, can you genuinely play the blues if you haven't faced adversity or struggle in your life?
The answer is, well, first of all, do you know anyone who hasn't faced some struggle in their life?
No.
Okay, so you know that's a universal, and look, you could have all the money in the world, you know what I mean, and not be happy. So that's one of the things about the blues. It's about, you know, that Buddhist, you know, life is suffering, you know, so that's intrinsic to it. But to answer your question from a musical and technical perspective, yes, you can play. You don't have to. And there's a book I'm going to recommend to you, and this may seem a little self-serving because I am one of the. I'm wondering where the heck is this book at? I want to show you this. Oh, here it is. Okay. Murray Talks Music, Albert Murray on Jazz and Blues. And you see this guy right here wrote the afterwords, Greg Thomas. So the reason I recommend this book in this context is because there's a conversation in here between Wynton Marsalis and Albert Murray. Albert Murray was Wynton's intellectual grandfather and mentor. He was my mentor. I mean, I actually knew and was mentored by him. And they talk about that very issue. So when you're talking about a musical form, you learn the musical form and then you practice and get better at that form. So there's a separation between your actual experience and what you're playing, which is a feeling in form, that's Suzanne Langer, but you don't have to have experienced the heartbreak in the specific form that you're singing about, you know? You can draw upon that. So when you're talking about an art form, you're talking about developing a certain technical skill level to then play that form yourself and with others. So yes and no, but it's not a requirement in the sense that you meant that. That's why I want to say no. You need to learn the form, you know, because without knowing the form and the technique, your ability to express those feelings in the form are going to be limited, right? So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
You got it.
Maybe Gray, you had a question.
I'm sorry?
Oh, maybe Gray had a question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Greg. My question was about if you feel that music offers an opportunity for cultures to learn about each other in a less adversarial context than we're usually offered through things like social media.
What do you think?
I mean, I definitely imagine that it is, but I'm interested in your viewpoint on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, music is one of those universals. All cultures, you know, have music. dance. So it's so fundamental to our human experience that it's something that can go past some of the cognitive or much of the cognitive and go right into embodiment, you know, it's because so you can feel it and not just think about it. So the answer is absolutely. And it does do that. And I want to address something. This is not in your question, but this is something that troubles me so much with certain discourses. And I'll have an opportunity, hopefully in some other places, when they talk about appropriation of cultures, there is such a thing, but I think that's overdone. That's the way cultures work. You see something you like, you try it on for size, you compare it to your own, you have fun with it, you play, and you adapt it. That's the way culture actually works. So it's not about appropriating per se, it's about the actual way that culture enacts itself in the world. You know what I mean? Now, if you take something, claim it as your own, don't give it credit, that's appropriation. But if you can acknowledge the sources and say, this is part of my learning and this is where I got it from, that's not appropriation, that's appreciation. Okay?
Megan, you had a similar question. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask it?
Greg, I think you just answered my question already. I was asking for a positive direction that you'd like to take this idea of cultural appropriation, and I don't know, maybe there's something else you'd like to take that idea in. I'm worried about the de-emphasis on personal intention that often comes into that story. And worse than de-emphasis, I was trying to think of the right word there, but almost attacking the idea that intention matters. I'm often reading that in mainstream media about this idea, which really worries me. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add to that idea, if you've already answered that.
Well, Megan, I want you to tell me a little more about the connection between intention and appropriation. I want to get that before I respond from you.
Well, it seems to me that intention is absolutely critical in that question. So if you're absorbing something because you like and respect it, and then you're making changes to it and creating your own thing based on that, then that to me seems like a really positive thing to do. But there are narratives that I've read or heard from people that I know that says that it actually doesn't matter whether you have good intentions or not. What really matters is, you know, what your genetic heritage is. And that to me seems like a really concerning direction that I see people around me moving in.
Yeah, I hear you. That's very troubling. That is very troubling on so many levels. Let me just give a little plug here. My wife and I, we have a blog called tuneintoleadership.com. And I mention it because she loves to write about creativity, purpose, intention, and those types of things. So I would invite you all to check that out. Intention, of course, intention matters. Motivation matters. I mean, one of the things about the discourse on the left, particularly the far left, with a postmodern, very progressive and political bent, is that they stretch a discourse that beyond not only logic in many cases, but so far away from the very traditions that they should be looking to for wisdom. Okay? You're gonna actually say, okay, let me give you this. When I was in grad school at NYU from 1996 to 99, I was in an American Studies doctoral program at NYU. And that's when this stuff was really getting going. So I studied critical race theory and then critical theory that was based on. I studied Foucault and Derrida and others, you know. And I got something from it, but I was so grounded in Ellison and Murray that I was inoculated from some of the extremities from that. And I was also in my mid-30s, so I wasn't going to just fall down some path. But they talked about essentialism back then. Essentialism was the idea that you have, based on some inherited characteristics, something that's essential to you based on your blood, your genetics. And the idea at the time is that essentialism wasn't good. It seems like essentialism has been thrown out the window and adopted as the fundamental essence of your identity. And it's so far off base. And it's like, there are bubbles of discourse, and it just so happens that that particular bubble of discourse is now getting mainstream distribution. But we have to really critically analyze such terms and such ideas because they're dangerous. Where do you find the basis for human commonality? Where do you find the basis for, saying that, or cosmopolitanism, to use that term? I mean, that idea is so foreign if you're going to say that because I have a particular genetic heritage, therefore XYZ. What about your cultural heritage? Biology is the foundation. Culture comes along to extend our biological inheritance like a prosthetic. That's what great anthropologist Paul Bohannon, who wrote a foundational book for me, How Culture Works, put it. So if culture is something that extends your human capabilities, your biological capabilities, and culture is something that you learn through education, language, observation, traditions. If you're in the United States, where you have all of these multi-ethnic, multicultural, I am an anti-racist, so I'm against the concept of race. So I don't like to say multiracial, but we could say that too. How in the world you have all of these mixtures, what Albert Murray called omni-Americanism, all of these different mixtures. How in the world are you going to even scientifically determine some type of racial or genetic purity? It's bullshit. Most of us are mixed one way or the other, and if we're not mixed biologically, we're mixed culturally. I mean, it's ridiculous, but we have to be patient, and we have to give people a chance to voice their opinion, and hopefully through discourse and dialogue, you can help them look at things differently or consider some different ideas, and maybe show them some of the limitations of that train of thought, because there's so many limitations and so many dead ends to that train of thought. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers the appropriation anymore. I think I kind of did when I psychically anticipated your question, Megan. Okay, so is that okay? All
cool.
right.
All right, so we'll have time for one more question. Yeah, let's end with Lisa Norton. You had a few questions.
Lisa. All right. By the way, this was early on. Will you put the title /author up, please? So Grace, you bring up Lisa, but Grace, I want to say that the first quote was Albert Murray, and I have a piece called Reading Albert Murray in the Age of Trump. That's available at the New Republic, that quote comes from. So Grace, you can find it there. And the second quote was by Ralph Ellison from an essay of his, Richard Wright's Blues. If you get the Modern Library's collected essays of Ralph Ellison, you'll find that essay and that quote in there. So that I hope that's helpful, Grace. Okay, Lisa, where is she? Bring her up.
Greg.
How you doing, Lisa?
I'm doing good. I've been a fan of Greg's for a long time, at least a decade. I love seeing your voice in the space more. So thank you. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I would just say, quick question, because a bunch of people +1 the idea of hearing your comment about convening across spaces of difference of all kinds.
Yeah.
If you could speak to anybody right now, who would that be? And if so, what would you ask or offer them?
One person or two that I would bring together?
That's any way you hear it, Greg.
Okay. The woman who's leading the 1619 Project at the New York Times. This is an essay that you read this essay, you cannot dismiss this essay she wrote. There are folks who counterstate the 1619 Project. Coleman Hughes, whom I love in many ways. I've stated that in my conversation with Integral Justice Warriors 2 days ago. But he and some others formed a committee or a group to be anti the 1619 Project based on some historical inaccuracies and the idea that this is presenting a picture of Black American life that's based on victimhood. A view, since I take the heroic blues idiom model, I chafe against that myself. But I want to be able to get together her, and forgive me, sister, for forgetting your name right now. I don't remember her name, but she's the lead on that project. I want to get her together with, say, John McWhorter. I want to see the two of them engage in discourse. Sit down and rap, okay? Sit down and talk. I want to see Brett Weinstein in conversation with, what's the sister who's critical race theory?
Not D'Angelo?
No, that's white fragility. Actually, she's another one. Let's use her. How about Brett Weinstein and Robin DiAngelo engage in conversation, especially since that term was weaponized against him when he was drummed out of Evergreen in that unjust way. And I think he was very hurt, but he was deeply hurt by that. And so I think there's some selection bias when he sees this everywhere. I'm not saying that it's not a troublesome, but he sees it like everywhere because I think that's what he experienced, you know? So how about engaging in a conversation with her? Maybe she gets a chance to say, you know, I'm sorry that term was used against you in that way. So he could have some somatic trauma healing. You know what I'm saying? So they're just people who are talking, that they're straw manning and straw womening each other, and they're not freaking talking. So I want to help make that happen. You know, now maybe they'll use their own platform because you got the, you know, intellectual dark web. Now we got, you know, Stoa, we got Rebel Wisdom, we got these different platforms. And I love, you know, Peter's, you know, the spirit of what the Stoa is, bringing different voices together, giving people, you know, a platform for that. And I plan to do some of the same thing, you know, so I would love to see some of these conversations. I really think there could be breakthroughs. I'll give you another one on another level of the culture. I'd like to see, what's his name? The Open Society. These are billionaires. The Koch brother, who's still living, and what's his name? What's the guy?
George Soros.
George Soros. Let's see George Soros and one of the Koch brothers sit down in conversation. How about that? Because to the left, the Koch brothers, they were the devil. To the right, George Soros is the devil. So let's have the two devils sit down and talk and see if we can come to something. What would be wrong with that? I mean, maybe it's a pipe dream. Maybe I'm just a dreamer. Maybe I'm an idealist. I don't know. But these folks, you know, you should get them together and talk. Thank you, Lisa.
Very cool. So yeah, we're about time. Is there any closing thoughts you had for us, Greg?
Well, I just ask folks to forgive me for being so demonstrative. I get kind of excited about these things, and I use a lot of hand gestures and stuff. I can't be as cool and calm, it seems, as John McWhorter and Coleman. They're just able to sit back, lay in the cut, be cool about it. I got to work on that. But anyway, I'm kind of joking. I just want to thank you, Peter. Just thank you, and you know, everyone's here for the opportunity to share my heart and my mind, you know, my soul with you. And I just appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. I really, really enjoyed that conversation we had. And I'll read this comment. Someone said, Greg feels like a father figure I would want to impress. So I agree with that sentiment.
I appreciate that.
And then we would love to have you back. There's like a lot of stuff, that other sessions that we're talking about, even a metamodern Black experience conference symposium we might have here. So I think that would be really cool. So let's talk about a few upcoming events at the Stoa, 8:30 today. So like in PM Eastern time, which is 30 minutes. Tyson Wagner is doing his freestyle rap. It's called Flowing Through Unknowingness. So just RSVP on the website. It's really, really cool and fun, building that relationship with uncertainty. We got a bunch of cool events, man. Let me just read a few. Maybe, great. You have an event tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. Did you talk about that, if you're still here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited for this event tomorrow. It's called Dark Eyes with Leslie Rogers. Leslie Rogers is from the Light Dark Institute, and he works with bringing a different sort of understanding to our sexualities that's focused on absolutely radical self-acceptance. And it's just, I just am wild about it. I love it so much. I'm so excited. I think you absolutely have to be there.
Very cool. And definitely check out like Maybe Gray's Raw Sexuality series. She's like amazing MC. So I'm very excited to see where she takes that. And yeah, before her event on Tuesday, we have a Dialogos with John Vervaeke, Guy Sangsok, possibly Jordan Hall. They're having a bi-weekly Dialogos session where they engage in Dialogos amongst themselves. And then they kind of spread the Dialogos energy, and people go in breakout rooms and do it amongst themselves. So that's going to be bi-weekly. First session is tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Really excited about that. Yeah, we have How to Win Friends and Influence People During a Meta Crisis. So my buddy Kevin Crone, who's the principal at the Dale Carnegie here in Toronto, he's going to come in and you know, talk about how to have social skills during our meta crisis. So definitely check that out. And that is July 2nd, Thursday at 10 p.m. a.m. Eastern time. Cool. So that being said, the Stoa is based off of a gift economy, and we're viewing it as a gift for all of us to freely use in this time of need. If you're inspired to provide a gift to the Stoa, there's a few options on the link right here. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out.